Good evening. How are you guys? Can you see me? Okay. Maybe I do need it. Oh, I should have tried it. Okay. Let's start that again. Good evening. It's good to see you guys. Now that I'm a little bit taller, welcome to the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan public meeting. I'm really grateful that you are willing to spend your time with us for a little bit and to give input into the process. And I get the opportunity to describe it a little bit. My name is Candace Hasenjager. I'm the director at the Division of Water Resources. I'm also the chair of the Water Development Coordinating Council, which I'll describe. For this process, there are a couple of ways to ask questions. One is through the QR code right here on the screen. And then the other option is to go to water.utah.gov/UWIP-projects. That will take you to a form in which you can put in questions as well as provide comments into the process. So just to get started there, if you do go to the website, there's a couple of different things that you'll see. Obviously, you can see the meeting schedule. You can submit a comment through this little box here, and then you can also review a process draft. This is a 14-page document. This is a 14-page document that you don't have to have all reviewed right now. We'll accept comments after the fact, after this meeting. And then when you go to submit a comment or a question, it takes you to this form. So this is kind of what that looks like, just to orientate you for this evening. Here's a kind of overview of the review process draft. So it's there for you to review. And like I said, we will take comments after this evening. So for tonight, the purpose of this meeting is to present information. We've spent a lot of time developing a draft process and potential prioritization process for the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan, which is a new planning effort the state is undertaking. So we are looking to you to receive comment on this draft and as we develop this prioritization process. So for tonight's agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Water Development Coordinating Council. We love our acronyms. I should have mentioned that in state government, so I'll try to make sure I clarify those. I'll do an introduction on this council. Then I will provide the goals and background for the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan. And then I'll turn it over to Eric Dixon, who will provide us with an overview of the draft prioritization process. And then I'll come back up and do some Q&A with all of you guys. With us today, just from my staff and consultants, we have Shalane DiBernardi. She is our assistant director over our supply resiliency branch and has been very involved in this process. Eric Dixon, as I mentioned, will provide some information regarding the draft prioritization process. He is the manager of our design and construction section. Isabel Melmer, thank you. She's one of our staff engineers and has been working a lot on this process and is in Eric's section. And then really grateful for Keith Larson to be here from Bowen and Collins. He is our consultant and has been helping with this process. So lots of great people in the room that will hopefully be able to answer all of the questions or go and find out. Hey, so the Water Development Coordinating Council has actually been around for a long time, since the 1980s. This was a group that was made up of most of the water funding agencies within the state. Currently, the makeup is with the Division of Water Resources, the Division of Water Quality, the Division of Drinking Water, the State Treasurer's Office is involved, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, Workforce Services, which you might be like, why is the Housing and Community Development member part of this council? And really it's because of the Community Impact Board that provides funding for water in some parts of the state. And then most recently, there was an addition to this council to include a large water conservancy district, and that is Washington County Water Conservancy District. So that's the current makeup. As far as the goals of the council, it was established to coordinate all of the different funding throughout this state, to assess water infrastructure need, to advise the governor and the legislature, to report on water-related infrastructure needs. And most recently, they added 2 additional goals for the council, and that is to gauge in the planning prioritization of this unified water infrastructure plan, as well as to distribute the funds of the water infrastructure fund, which is our newest water infrastructure fund that was created. So just a little bit more background, and then I'll turn it over to Eric here in just a little bit. So in 2024, Representative Snyder had a bill, which we lovingly call House Bill 280, which doesn't mean a lot to most people, but it did some really significant things, and it was passed and went into effect on May 1st of 2024. It had a laundry list of things for the Division of Water Resources as well as the councils to do, including starting to do an annual status of funds of all of the relevant agencies, to do integration of existing funds. So how is this new process going to work with our older or historical process? What is that going to look like? It also required the relevant agencies, which I'll describe here in just a moment, to submit a plan. And then we're also in the process of doing a fee study, which will be completed in just 10 short days from now. And then we'll have to have the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan ready and prepared by March 1st of next year. So we have some pretty strict timelines and goals associated with this. Last year, after the integration of existing funds, another bill was passed, HB 285, that made some modifications to the existing statute to allow funds to transfer. One of the other really big things that the HB 280 did was it created the water infrastructure account. It was started with a little bit of seed money, 2.5 million, with an idea that it would eventually have more, and that's to be figured out. And then finally, just in our spare time, we're to do a new state water plan by the end of 2026. So they are keeping us busy. Overall, the goals is with this new funding process is to create a comprehensive list of prioritized projects. A lot of people like to equate it to roads, how UDOT funds transportation projects and how there's a ranked and prioritized list that's brought to the legislator every year. That it was kind of the goal behind it. We all know that water is different. Water is not quite the same as roads, but we can take similar ideas and are trying to apply them as the legislature dictated. So really creating a centralized process, having additional coordination between the agencies. And I should mention that the current relevant agencies are the Division of Water Resources, so the Board of Water Resources, the Water Quality Board, and then the Drinking Water Board. So those are the divisions that represent the relevant agencies. And our hope is that it increases this coordination, it increases transparency and efficiency, and hopefully align with the state water plan, and really just have a better handle on the water infrastructure needs of the state. So that is what I've got for you, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about the process.
Thank you, Candace. It's great to be here again. I'm Eric Dixon with the Division of Water Resources also. So I'm going to give a little bit more specific background, and then we'll get into the meat of what this whole purpose of this meeting is for the prioritization process and getting comments and making sure everybody knows where they can find out things and what's in the plan. But it all started back in February and March. We kind of did some outreach. We sent out emails to everybody we could find on email groups from the water quality, drinking water. And then we went out around to several of the conference, those fall or the spring conferences, rural water users, Utah water users, anything we could find. We tried to get out to let people know that we were going to be requesting projects. Candace mentioned, one of the main goals of this is to get a complete list of all water projects for the next forever in Utah. I mean, 20 plus years. Any water projects. We get questions. What about this kind of water? What about this kind of water? Yes, if it deals with water, we want it on this list. And there have been questions, well, what if we don't need funds? And the concept has kind of been, even if you don't think you're gonna be coming for state funds, it would probably be good to have it on the list. One, so we kind of have a better feel for what's overall needs of the state are. And also, Candace mentioned the water infrastructure fund and the fee study, where if it comes out that there is a fee or there is a tax or something, it might change how you look at things for coming to the state to get funding. So that was kind of what, and then we opened that submission for April 7th through May 9th, and we got a lot of projects submitted. I'll show you kind of what we got from that initial compilation. We know we didn't get everything. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then June 30th was when Candace talked about the 3 relevant agencies. They had to have their relevant agency plans, and those would be the basis for the UWIP. And then October 8th, the prioritization process document, which is that 14-page that you can get a link to, was sent out for people to review, and so we can get public comment. So this is kind of a summary of what we got from that initial project submission. The maps just kind of show the distribution of it. And we were really happy that we got it all over the state. It wasn't like just the Wasatch Front submitted projects or just the rural areas, and we got a good mix of everything. I know it's kind of, that's what that map's for, just kind of get a visual of where the projects are. You can see the number of projects, how many entities put them in. The total project costs that were submitted were about $17.6 billion. And of that, what people had identified as what they were hoping to get state funding for was about 5.8 billion. So we took that number, and when we had them submitted, it was broken into what do you need over the next one. One of the categories is what do you need the next 1 to 2 years. So we took what was submitted for those 1 to 2 years and broke it into 2 years, which came out to about these first 2 years, about $420 million would be needed each year. This kind of shows a breakdown of how that came about. So there's a column called submitted projects, and that was the 375 was in that, the state funding that would be needed. And then there's one, we had this small community allowance. We understand that there's, some of the smaller communities might not have their master plan type thing laid out 10, 15 years into the future, or even, they might be just be what's the current problem and that we have to deal with. So we had a formula that was what came from, or it was either Division of Drinking Water or Division of Water Quality. They have this process where kind of we're able to estimate how much we think some of these smaller communities would need. And we call that the small community allowance. And we did take that and we kind of compared it to the submittals we had, make sure we, if we saw that there was an area that had a lot of these smaller communities, we would take some out of this allowance, because we felt like some of the areas did a pretty good job at having that information prepared. And that comes up with a total request. And then it was, you can see it was broken out into the 3 different relevant agencies for how much would be in drinking water projects, water quality projects, and water resources projects for the roughly $420 million total. And this is just a different visual of it, showing you can see the jumps in the line that goes across the first 1 to 2 years, and then there's a 3 to 5 years, a 6 to 10 years, and then an 11 to 20 years. And we know that that's, as those years approach, that line will come up. It's more just like we put on the note there. The long-term projects drop off because a lot of entities probably haven't planned out that far or got accurate numbers for out that far. But it does show that over the next 10 years, the average potentially requested from the state is between 375 to 450 million each year. Okay, we're getting a little closer to the prioritization thing and what we're all here for. That's some good background information for you. But this is a kind of a flow chart that our consultants helped put together. And we've broken it into 3 phases. First phase, and we'll go through each of these in detail: the provisional scoring, relevant agency ranking, and funding prioritization. Again, all this information, these graphs and things are in most of the not everything on this presentation, but like these layouts of the graphs are in that the process PDF that you can download. So provisional scoring, what the purpose of this one was is we get those projects in and we want to come up with a score, so we kind of a preliminary ranking based on the scores that were these provisional scoring. And we'll take that and those were distributed to the different agencies. So the first time we collected this, and this is before we had this Utah project portal, which is still in process, but the first round we sent out and had people fill out a Google form. Then we took that and we downloaded it into spreadsheets, and it was pretty time consuming, cumbersome, but we needed to get it going, and that was what we had in place to get that first round pulled together. For future rounds, we're right now in the process of working on this Utah project portal. It's tied into this Utah project portal is already made, and we're adding a component of it for UWIP into this portal. And so the plan is we'll take everything that we've already had submitted from all the entities, and we'll dump it into we'll pull it in, and so that they don't have to go in and reload it. So anybody here that you've put stuff in, don't worry, you're not gonna have to re-enter everything. We'll be asking everybody to look it over and confirm it and make sure everything looks right. Do any updates you need to. And then the benefit of this portal is that then entities will be able to hop in there when they have new projects they come up that they identify, they can put them in this portal, and it'll stay updated. You know, as they look at things, we thought this project was more important, we need to rechange our priorities, they can just update that automatically. So again, our hope and goal is to have this out by early November. Right now, we got the consultants that made this portal working on adding the UWIP to it. So all the projects come in, and then we had to figure out how are we going to score these. And we looking at all the information and the requirements and the stuff that was in the HB 280 and 285. We came up with these criteria. And then as the team, we got together, the UWIP team, and came up with some weights for the different ones of these. I'll quickly go through each of these. We're not going to spend too much time going through the details of them, but each one of these, for example, let's move into this first one, the hardship. Each one of these has different categories for what score you can get based on what the information submitted. MAGI, or median adjusted gross income, is one of them. So for example, in this one, if the entity that has applied for is planning to request a loan or a grant or funding from the state, if the local MAGI percent is less than 70% of the statewide median, and basically identifying that it's a lower income type of community, and they'll get a better score. Basically those with the lower income areas will be able to have a better chance to get state funding. And it shows a breakdown as those move down. For the critical issue, is it an item of public health, safety, or regulatory issue? If those are identified as significant issues, then they get a higher score and moving down those. And this is based on information that's submitted into the database, and then there'll be some manual review and confirmation and getting, if any information is missing, kind of identifying that. Water efficiency. We all know the importance of water efficiency, trying to reduce the use of water so that the water efficient projects will get a higher score. What level of design is the project? Is it just kind of conceptual still? They might say, yeah, we need this in the next 5 years, but we just know we need it. But if there's a project that we need this in the next couple of years, we've got plans ready, it's in a report where we've got a really good cost estimate, and the engineering and process has moved far along, and it's got the design moved far along. So scores for those different options. And then applicant priority. It's not our job to say, here's what project should be the most important for your agency or your entity. It is more what we know that you guys know what your needs are, and we want that to have an impact on the projects that get the higher score, this provisional score that we use. And again, if it's a smaller community, they might only have 3 or 4 projects, but some of those bigger communities, there was a few hundred, like 255 communities, but over 2,000 projects were submitted. Some of these entities submitted a couple hundred projects because they're a major. They have a lot of different water needs and water uses and larger population with it. And so on those, we can't just say you get your top 1 project. It's more of what's in your top 20% of your projects will get a higher score for that type of thing. And then we've always had the question and concern, is it just the Wasatch Front that's going to get all the money? Because that's where all the big communities are, and that's where all the bigger, humongous project needs are. And our intent was, no, we want to get this to the Wasatch Front where they have needs, the rural areas where they have needs. So this is a criterion we came up with that we felt addressed that. So it ties both the project or the population size in with the funding need identified. And so as you look at that, that one's kind of got two of those major components tied into that criterion. So all these projects came in, and then like I mentioned, they were divided between the three relevant agencies. And this kind of shows which type of project was given to which agency. Water Resources got the three listed there: drinking water. Everybody needs drinking water. So that was a big enough lump for them. Even with that, they're still getting more than the other. When we show you the breakdown of the cost, you'll kind of see what there's just drinking water needs and their expensive needs. And then water quality with the reuse, stormwater, wastewater, and water supply in the watersheds. So that's how the projects were broken down. And then the relevant agencies took that information and it goes into phase two. And phase two is where they basically do some refinement if needed. Review the information that was submitted, maybe follow up with the entity that has submitted the information and say, here's submitting information, and look at the submitted information. And kind of, like I said, some of those, well, like is it a critical public need? You know, some of these, let me come back to some of these. So we say we've got information in the database, but then we all just do some manual review, just kind of verify and make sure that we're comfortable with what was submitted in the information. Sorry about that. So that's kind of the main phase of the relevant agency ranking. And then they take that information and the relevant agencies insert the information into their relevant agency plans. And the first round of relevant agency plans were submitted to the WDCC at the end of June of this year. And so that information is now being used by the WDCC to kind of set it as we're setting up the UWIP. Then the final step, which is where we're at now, is the funding prioritization. The whole purpose of the prioritization is so we know what we get a good feel of, here's how much money we need based on all these projects that were submitted. But how do we decide who that money goes to? And that's what this prioritization process that we need your help and comments and feedback on is for. We'll look at several of things. And again, this is another thing as we're looking through the House bill and the information that's available. The project quality and readiness, the system rates that are in place, the provisional score, or we set some funding cost share limitations to kind of explain what those mean. And then the capital asset management plans, which is Candace mentioned HB 285 of this year, and that got added on as part of that anybody coming for funding needs to have a capital asset management plan in place. So the prioritization criteria, like I mentioned, we've got all these projects. They've been given this score, and then each of the 8 different relevant agencies can kind of sort them out and see where their scores fall into place. But how do we prioritize how far down we're going to be looking and asking for money? One of those is based on what are the entities currently charging. So that first item is the usage rates greater than or equal to 1.5% of the MAGI. So basically we want the entities to be charging as much. If they're not charging enough and they come to us to ask for state funds, it's like, oh, you can still be charging more and getting money from your own resources before you come to this. UWIP, the provisional score threshold, the WDCC can kind of look at all those projects and kind of in coordination with the UWIP team and the agencies. We feel for example, let's say we look at these projects and we feel like a score above 70 looks like it has everything that it needs. It's got the sound designs there. They have the needs based on the scoring that they got. Kind of find an area where we say anything with this score above, could potentially receive funding. Things below this point, we just don't think don't have enough information or enough need for this round. And then the next one is this funding limitations for individual projects. We know that there's some of these projects that have been submitted are $100 million. And we don't want, everything from the very first money that becomes available just go to one project. So we'll show you the concept we have for that on this in the next slide. But before we get into that, again, the capital asset management plan is required to be in place as part of HB 285. So this is where it talks about the maximum grant funding available based on the project size. So basically starting with 0, if the most you can get is 75%. It immediately stops dropping off and goes down to a project that has a cost of $10 million. It can only get up to a maximum of 20% grant as you get over to this point in line. And then it levels off there. We're saying anything over $10 million can get 20% grant. And that's the maximum available. We know some places might say we only need a 5% grant, or we only need based on what they have available in their resources. And again, as it says on here, this is if grant funds are even available. I mean, this is all dependent on if legislation is made that makes these funds available, if the fee or tax or anything is made available to put funds into the WIF. It all depends on the money being there too. We're going to kind of look at an example here. So the second number down there, this 100 million for existing reliable funds, is we've kind of looked at what the relevant agencies have in place with the revolving funds and the loans getting paid back. It's roughly about $100 million are available from that each year. And those are loans, so those are going to be revolving funds where the loans keep coming, the payments keep coming back in. And let's say we look at it and we look at the project and there's about $100 million that legislation gives us or comes into the WIF from the available resources. That brings us up to a total of $200 million available. And based on the different funding limitations that are chosen by the WDCC, that could fund anywhere from 150 to 200 projects. And then so it comes in, there's a number that the entities say we need. I say, well, let's lower that based on how much some places are already charging. We know that they can charge more. So let's say it starts at $300 million needed. It bumps it down 50. And then as they say, we know that a lot of these projects are big projects. You can only get a maximum of 20% for your project. Then that bumps the total funding need down another step. And that's where that 150 to 200 is based on which of those criteria are in the final selection. And then another part that needs to be set is, Candace talked about, how are these funds distributed? This is what we've come up with in the draft document for the prioritization, is whatever funds are available of the first 50% that get put into these funds, it would be divided, as it shows here, 40% for drinking water, 30% for water quality, and 30% for water resources. And then the remaining 50% would be looked at and divided. The WDCC would say, based on the projects that are there in these plans and that have been submitted, this is how we feel it should be divvied out for that other 50%. So this is just showing an example of it was kind of based on what was submitted, but we know that with more information, more projects coming in, this will change, and this will change from year to year. Some years there might be a high demand for drinking water projects. Other years for one of the other entities or relevant agencies. So then when you add them together, for example, the 40% here and the 47% of this remaining 50%, it shows the total percent going to each of the different entities or the different relevant agencies to bring the $100 million total. And then they distribute that to the projects, looking at the prioritization and the projects that kind of rise to the top. Another critical part of everything is rules. We need to get rules put into the state code or the state rules. It's kind of ongoing, kind of parallel with what we're doing here with the prioritization process. We're in the process of pulling together some draft rules. But the intent is that feedback we get from this priority, because part of those rules is how are we prioritizing? What is the prioritization process? So we'll get all the feedback from these public meetings. Some of the rules will need to include what's an emergency projects and small projects. For example, the code says emergency projects and small projects do not need to go through this process, but it doesn't say what those are. So we're in the process of what is a small project. You know, a small project gets bigger and bigger every year as inflation goes up and costs get higher. And also, what's an emergency project? You know, we want to make sure it's not because maintenance just wasn't done and it was a maintenance issue. You know, the emergency projects need to be for emergencies. So we're in the process of defining those things. And then it also lists the other things that need to be in these rules. And when those rules are finalized, or the draft is submitted to the Office of Administrative Rules, and we'll be sending out information for people to make comments on that too. But our intent, like I said, is whatever we can that we get from these public meetings, we'll incorporate it as best we can into those rules, so that hopefully that rule process and comments is relatively smooth. So what's next? We're right now in the middle of this draft prioritization process. We have one more meeting next week down in Cedar City, but then we'll leave the comments open through the middle of November. So people have time to look at that document, review it, get their comments. And then we'll take that information and incorporate it into the plans. And then the Utah project portal, or like I mentioned, they're planning to open that in early November and notify everybody. So your information is in there. And those of you that weren't able to get information in, you need to notify us so you can get a login. It'll basically be, each entity can log in and edit their information. Anybody that wants to get in and enter information, they just need to let whoever's over that portal to let them know so they can get an account set up. And then the Utah Watersheds Council is in January 15th. The HB 280 says that we need to have the draft UWIP presented to them so we can get response or comments and feedback from them, so that we can get the UWIP finalized and then get it adopted by the WDCC, adopted by March 1st. And somewhere in that process, based on what comes out of the UWIP and all the projects, we will be requesting or making recommendations of what legislature, and they'll have the information to look at all these projects and their prioritization and make a decision on how much funding they want to put into that, or make a decision on the fee study and move forward from there. So again, if you have comments, our preference is even for this meeting, so that we can have it documented, click on that middle button, or if you have I'll have the QR code up here in a minute, submit a comment, and that button on the left or on the right is for getting a link to the draft process. All right. I'm going to turn it back over to Candace now, and she will be, so if you have questions, jump on your phone quick and enter them on. So thank you.
And I'm actually going to reintroduce Shalane DiBernardi. She's going to help run the Q&A portion. She's a pro, done this at several meetings, and can help answer those questions. Is there enough room up there for you?
Yeah, this will work. I don't have to completely hold it like I did at the last meeting. Hello, everyone. So far, there's only been one question submitted, asking, please clarify whether UWIP and WIF will be in place of or as well as the existing revolving loan funds, specifically Drinking Water and Clean Water Act. This will not take the place of. We are anticipating they will be in addition to. We're looking at, as Eric mentioned, the maximum grant amounts that could be provided through WIF funds. We are assuming that there would be entities that still would like some low interest loans through these other processes. So, okay. So they will not be replacing, but will be able to be used in place or in conjunction with those existing funds. But that's why we would like all the projects on the UWIP, so that we know what anticipated funding is going to be requested. Are there any questions from anyone in the room? Yes.
How would this apply to, in this county, a lot of our water is supplied by private companies. How would this apply to them? They have to go through the district, or can they apply directly?
So the question, we are streaming on YouTube. I don't know if that was said earlier. We are streaming. So to restate the question, how would private companies be involved in this? Would they have to go through the local district, or could they apply themselves? Private companies can apply themselves. Any water provider can submit an application or submit their project for consideration. So just about anything that qualifies as water infrastructure is eligible, and it's not limited to public entities like municipalities or water conservancy districts. Private irrigation companies, private domestic water companies are also eligible in this process. Yes.
And you mentioned some of this is going to be loans, some will be grants. Is that what on the loan? Is there a certain percentage the state mandates that be, or how's that?
Well, so for the loan funds, those are the ones that already exist with the boards of drinking water, water quality, and water resources. We are hoping that this new WIP fund gets direct appropriations from the legislature, or if it's funded with a tax or a fee, as mentioned, we're finishing up that fee study, whether the legislature decides to implement that or not. We are hopeful that the WIP funds would be provided as grants, and then the loan funds would be through the regular board funding programs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Oh. Technical issues. Thanks, Isabel. Anything else?
Joy,
Yes, Charles.
what, so it's not yet determined how the funding for revenue for the.
For the WIF?
Or the plan is yet.
No, it's not. Sorry. The question, it's not determined how the funding will go for this plan. Not yet. We are working on the process so we could submit information to the legislature. What the legislature does with that, we don't really know. And the council itself, the Water Development Coordinating Council, doesn't have authority to hand out funding without approval of the legislature. So at this point, there are very little funds in the WIF. The Board of Water Resources gave up the city's water loan fund to be consolidated into the WIF. So there's a little bit of money in there, but nowhere near the hundreds of millions that might be needed. So
It will be determined by the legislature, not by the water development.
Right. Right. We will make our recommendations through the fee study that we're finishing and through this process to let I think our real goal at this point in time is to let the legislature know just how big the need is and how they could help meet that need. What they choose to do with that, we can't control. I do see a couple questions online. Just 1 minute. Okay, so there's a question from an irrigation canal company about 1.5% of the Magi to qualify. And we were having this discussion separately. How does that apply to an irrigation company? And it doesn't really, we aren't quite sure how to consider affordability when we're talking about ag. It's something we're working on. It's something I would love input on. that's part of the reason we're soliciting public comments, is if you have suggestions for us, we are open to those. Hasn't necessarily been asked here, but at a prior meeting we had, how does that magi apply to water districts? You know, who don't necessarily, they're not a municipality providing to one city. How does that look there? And in those instances, we would probably be looking more at their taxing. How much of their taxing capacity are they utilizing to determine affordability? So we set a blanket statement of the magi, but it really only applies to municipal projects. And we're trying to figure out still how to make it apply to irrigation, ag, and water conservancy districts. There's another question here, 5 parts. Let me go through them one at a time. If a water system doesn't plan on needing any UWIP with state funding, should they still submit projects? My answer to others has been yes, please. One, we do really want to understand the full need, the full water infrastructure need, even if you don't think you'll need state funding. My second part to the answer is, if the legislature does decide to implement a fee or a tax, your users will be paying into this fund. You probably want to have access to it, especially if those funds are provided as grants. So I would encourage you to, yes, submit your system, even if you don't think you need funding. Let's see if I can see some of the others. Contingent on the state fee study, if a water system has no intention of needing UWIP with funds, why are they still potentially going to be required to pay into the UWIP with plan fund? The answer we've given to this is primarily because water infrastructure is a state need. While you may see your local needs and think that's all that applies to you, most of us travel throughout the state and hope that everywhere we go, we have access to clean, safe, reliable water. So it is being looked at as a state issue, even though water is provided by local entities. 3, with House Bill 280 and Senate Bill 80 going into effect around the same time, how much consideration has been given to the potential impacts this will have on end users and ratepayers? A lot. We understand that it's a lot to take all at the same time, and that more fees required by the state added on top of additional fees required by the state can be a hardship. I will say, as we've gone through this fee study, we had a large work group that provided us with input to consider all users throughout the state, rural, large municipalities, ag users, and we tried to take all considerations in as we looked at this fee study. We do know that too many fees are going to be too much for some people, and so we're hoping that it will not be really onerous, that it can be something, if the legislature decides to implement it, that it will be something that can be handled by users. And that's part of why I think the recommendations in the study are leaning towards it could be implemented in phases. So we aren't getting the necessary need for the first year, but maybe we can start to accumulate some wealth in the WIF that could do something. So number 4, can an applicant use UWIP with funds with state revolving funds on a project or other state and federal funding sources? Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the considerations is what other funding is available. last, it is our understanding that we can submit projects through the portal at any time throughout the year. Is that correct? If our water system has not yet submitted any projects, can we do so now? Yes to both of those. We do think that there may be a period of time each year we may close it just so that we're able to properly account for all the projects that have to be considered for that next plan year. But we do expect it will be open almost all year long, and that at any time a water system can submit new projects or update their existing projects. Yes, the portal is expected to be live in November, as Candace just said. You had a question.
The draft report that's being done or is coming close to being done, what are the two or leading measures for funding this?
The fee study that's being completed. So there is a recommendation for a user fee. Now we've been through several iterations, and at this point in time, I can't remember exactly what it's come down to. It's lower than what was reported at the Water Summit. I can say that. It would be a fee based on drinking water usage, so actual gallons used per connection.
How does an ag or someone that doesn't fit in that category participate in that, or private water?
So you still pay for drinking water, right?
Yeah.
So I think the intention is that you wouldn't have to pay into the system multiple times to have access to the funding. We are still, like I said before, on the other ag issues, we're still working on that. But to be eligible for WIF funding, we are proposing ways for irrigation companies to provide some public benefit that would allow them to be eligible. So it wouldn't necessarily that they have to pay a certain amount into the fee to be eligible for WIF funds. We would be looking at, can you offer some conservation? Can you offer a recreation opportunity? So we have proposed several different alternatives in the fee study of ways for ag to provide a benefit that makes them eligible for WIF funds. Yes.
The 1.5% median income. I'm just curious, does that include the potential fee that would be like post on end users or not, or like when you're looking at that 1.5, I assume it would be.
So I think, yes, the question about would the 1.5% magi consider the user end fee or not? Yes, it will include whatever is in place at the time. As of this moment, there is no additional state user fee. There will be one proposed. But again, we don't know if it will be implemented at all. So we will look at what's being charged to the end users when we consider that fee. I just realized I didn't finish the second part. The fee study mentions that a property tax could be helpful to funding the WIF, but there's no proposal for that at this time. But the state does recognize that it would be a more, well, not more, an additional stable revenue charged across the state that could provide additional funds, making the user fee not quite so difficult. So. Okay, appreciate that. Yes.
So kind of a follow up against the 1.5%. I'm assuming like if it's a municipality but that would be across all utilities that we service. So that 1.5, or is that specific just culinary?
So there is a consideration for, when we're talking about the 1.5% magi. There is consideration for drinking water is 1.5%. There would be a different consideration for sewer. And we would have to look at the service area if it's just in one city, township, or, I mean, we realize there's a lot we probably need to consider as we go forward with this, but yes, the 1.5 is currently drinking water, but there are additional rates we'd consider for sewer utilities as well. Yes.
Throughout this process, Representative Snyder had said that they would make some funds available for smaller entities, particularly canal companies that may not have capital asset plans.
Right.
To help them get those plans written. Has that happened yet, or is that still in the works potentially?
Okay, so the question is, Representative Snyder's promised that funds would be made available to help smaller entities prepare capital asset management plans, because as you know, I'm sure, HB 285 made capital asset management plans a requirement to have access to these funds. I don't know if that we've got an official process yet, but I believe planning is an eligible project, water infrastructure project that funds could be used for. So I don't know that we've come up with an official application process yet for those funds, but we'll work on that and get our information updated. Funds are available?
No.
If funds are made available. Yeah, I mean, we do have a little bit in the WIP right now, but I don't know that we could fund all the necessary capital asset management plans with those funds right now. Thank you, Candace. Anything else? There have been more submitted. Okay. If UWIP funding will be in conjunction with Division of Drinking Water for drinking water projects, would that be 2 separate applications or just one? We're still working that out, but we are hopeful that getting your project in the portal would let drinking water know that you have something you want to do, and they would invite you to either provide clarifying information for their board to consider funding or submit their application. Since this portal isn't necessarily a full application process, it's submitting the information necessary to get you prioritized and ranked on the plan list. So we're hopeful that it will not bog things down. We're hopeful that this makes things more efficient. We're working towards that end. Yes, Keith.
So ultimately, we hope it's one process, but in the meantime, what do we do?
Yes, thank you. As Keith said, we're hoping it's one process, but we aren't done yet. In the meantime, what do we do? I have recommended to those who have asked me about Board of Water Resources to submit the project into the portal and submit a funding application to the Board of Water Resources. That way you're on the radar in both areas. If you know you have something that's coming up in the next year, that would be my recommendation. Yes.
All right, with the capital asset plans that's required, is it capital improvement plan or a master plan considered capital asset plan, or separate?
I don't know. So the question is for the capital asset management plan, if a master plan or what did you call it? Capital improvement plan. And I believe we have to lay out in rule what's required in the capital asset management plan. I'm not sure that it's laid out in the code, so we probably need to put that in our rules. And is it laid out in code?
It is.
Okay, so if it meets the requirements of code, then we would consider that as meeting the requirements. That sounds like you're getting a better answer from Rodney anyway.
Yeah, Ronnie's giving me the go. I don't know what's in there, so.
Awesome. No, thank you. We do have another question. Do you have an idea of what tax or fee on ag water would look like? Would it be on acre foot depleted or diverted? And that is one I can say we are not recommending a tax or fee on ag water. We know it's not feasible to even recommend an amount that would be charged based on usage. So that's why we would be looking more at, can you provide a public benefit that would allow you to be eligible for this funding? Last chance. Well, we've provided you a great big document to go through and review, and please submit more comments if you have them, because we really are looking to update this and make it as clear and efficient and transparent as we possibly can. Keith.
So I was just gonna ask that, what do we need most out of this meeting? And that is comments and feedback on the prioritization process. That's the fee. I know people have lots of questions about.
Yes.
And that is still coming, but this prioritization process needs to be finalized in the next month.
Yes.
And so that's where we need your comments and feedback.
Yes, Keith is absolutely right. That's why we're holding these public meetings, is to understand concerns and try to take in everything and make sure we do this prioritization process right. As we've all said, this is new for all of us. And so we don't want to mess this up the first time. So yes, we appreciate all your help. Yes.
All the prioritization of the scorecards, and when it was first introduced, you're gonna have to go in and talk about it. They had it all categorized out, like 6 or 7 different, and they had dams, reservoirs toward the bottom. I mean, that's your #1 resource. So with the scorecards, are getting rid of where it actually places on the list, just having a list and going off total score. You're gonna say drinking water trumps the reservoir, the storm, drinking water.
Great question. As far as prioritization versus a year and a half ago versus now, I think we have looked primarily at total score, but also considering this breakdown, Eric mentioned that there will be an allocation for each board, each division, and the different projects are assigned to the different divisions. So where dams and reservoirs might be considered by the Board of Water Resources, that funding would not be affected by what's happening over in drinking water. So they would have their own prioritization list. Now, it depends on what funding is made available, if any, and the funding, we said the first 50% would be split up, 40% drinking water, 30 to water quality, and 30 to water resources. The remainder would be at the discretion of the council. But that leaves, at least water resources will always have something if there are funds available. And we understand the necessity of dams and reservoirs, and water resources primary considerations are dams, secondary, and ag water. So yes, thank you, Eric. Dam safety upgrades, however, are not part of this process. No, dam safety upgrades have their own code and their own appropriations, so they are not at this point part of this process. Maintenance, new dams, those are part of the UWIP process, but upgrades to meet current dam safety standards are not funded through this process. Currently. Yes.
You anticipate, like, on an annual basis, once the portal will be open year round, but people submit it, but then a ranking once a year, or would that be twice a year, 3 times quarterly?
So our anticipation, the relevant agencies, as were mentioned, water resources, water quality, and drinking water, have to do a relevant agency plan, update it every year. So June 30th of every year, each agency has to have a new plan. So we will go through, and that's why I say we may shut the portal for a time to gather the information for all of those projects and be able to prioritize them for that new year's plan. So that is our anticipation. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention. It's great to see such a good crowd out here. Our last meeting was much smaller in attendance. So we appreciate y'all taking time out of your day to be here. And again, if you can submit any information through the form, we are open to all your comments and feedback. And if you have additional questions later, please feel free to submit those as well. As we said, this will be open until we'll be receiving comments and questions until the 14th of November. Good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.